so my skeptical mind, and that's just who I am. My skeptical mind goes to, well, yeah, of course, you've got this guy over here that's logical and reasonable, and you got this guy over here that's wearing a tinfoil hat. Of course, the tinfoil hat guy's gonna see a lot of stuff, right? He's like imagining it, or he's watched one too many sci-fi movies.
But it can be used to help us frame hypotheses for UFO propulsion, power, stealth, weaponry.
Everything that we experience is very positive.
Sometimes the field of ufology has a short memory span.
We didn't know anything about the $22 million back then. We just kind of thought, well, this is, and I think that was the reason why they were looking for military type.
Well, it must be Friday evening, because here I am with my favorite people from all over the world who are listening to really the one show that is trying to bring a light, do a lot of things, a lot of dark things sometimes. But for me, it is incredibly important that as we're weaving through the world of ufology, that we understand things are not usually what they seem. And while we are interested in specific places, there might be people in these places that have a vested interest to do things behind the scenes that aren't in our best interest. I've been exposing that, as you know, and let me tell you, my journey in doing that has been incredibly difficult. I have been bullied, harassed, stalked online. I have been threatened. I have, let me just say, been hit upside the head a few times. And it serves to make me stronger in my resolve for each and every one of us to find a safe haven, a place where we can talk about our experiences, a place that we can be protected, a place that we can move forward and really get to the core of what's happening. But as I tell you, you can't do that without exposing some of the corruption. And so each week when I am bringing people to the show, I want you to understand that even though you might not see the relevance, please pay attention. Please listen closely, because there is. And this is helping all of us put the puzzle pieces together. And that is critical if we are ever going to move through this. I want to say again, thanks to all of my friends, my supporters. I could not do this without you. And if you want to see the show continue and carry on not only with that, but to preserve the work of many others in the subject, then please go to UFOclassified.com and pledge your support on Patreon. It is a lifeline, and I want to thank all the people that take the time and pledge their support to keep me here. I am not beholden to anyone, much to some people's dismay. Anyway, on that note, I want to just tell you that I recorded this interview. This is pre-recorded, so the first hour and 15 minutes I did earlier today, and then I will be interviewing one of my friends from high school who had a really interesting experience here in Utah. But I've reached out to Peter Kirk Lister, and I hope, Peter, if I pronounce your name wrong, you can just, we'll just have a chat about that. But I reached out to him, and we've been communicating for a while now. He is from Utah, and he is a really interesting human being who has done a lot. I didn't realize how much he had done. He is a community activist. He believes in peace activism, eco-justice. He has done a lot, which he will tell you about tonight. And his family has a deep standing in Roosevelt and in the area where Skinwalker Ranch is located. So I want you to listen to this interview. I will be in chat. And now I'd like to bring you Peter. Or maybe I won't be bringing you Peter. Okay, you know what, you guys? I am telling you why. There is something just rotten in Denmark. You guys couldn't hear Peter, could you? And this is why I need somebody here right now on standby, taking my hand and holding it. That would be really, really helpful. So you know what I'm going to do? Actually, is I'm going to see if I could call Peter. Oh, my Lord, have mercy on my tired soul. So this worked earlier, but baby Joseph, help me, Mary. So hang on one second. Peter, if you're listening, I'm going to Skype you right now. But anyway, so, oh my God, please just help me. Sweet Margaret. Okay, so on that note, what I want to tell you about was, because we're just going to go on from here after I just pick my job off the floor as usual and then try to get a hold of Peter. I'm not sure why that audio is not working.
In your neck of the woods.
Oh, there we go. No, it is. Oh, and
Roosevelt, Utah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there you go, guys. Because your family and the history in, Roosevelt and in that area is so fascinating for both of us. But tell me a little bit about your family.
Well, my family was one of the early non-native settling families of the area, and I go back about 5 generations in the Uinta Basin on my mom's side, and but I was brought up in Carbon County, which is my dad's side. So literally, the house I grew up in Carbon County on my dad's side was about a quarter mile from the entrance to 9 Mile Canyon from Highway 6, and so my dad's family is all at the southern entrance to 9 Mile, and my mother's family goes back 5 generations in the Uinta Basin in Roosevelt and Arcadia area and all of that. And so they've been very prominent. My grandpa, he was the mayor of Roosevelt. Ralph Schultz was his name for a couple terms, and I was on the city council. He was, on the first board of the first credit union there. He was on the board of the first radio station there. He chaired the Uinta Basin Industrial Convention. They go back a long time, and we're kind of all over leadership in that part of the country for quite a while. My grandpa ultimately moved to West Valley because all the rest of the family, except my mother, who just passed in Roosevelt, and we just attended her funeral there in Roosevelt, they all moved to Salt Lake area, and so my grandma and grandpa ended up ultimately concluding their lives there in Salt Lake. But we still have all those ancestral ties to the Uinta Basin. My mother lived in Roosevelt for the vast majority of her life, and that's where she ultimately passed on here just a few weeks ago. And so both sides of my family go back many generations, basically literally on either end of 9 Mile Canyon. I grew up there, hunted, fished, camped, did everything.
That is such
area
a beautiful place. How wonderful. I mean, I try to go to 9 Mile Canyon and up in that area a few times a year, and it's just absolutely stunning when you're there, and I just see all of the, the petroglyphs and things. It takes your breath away. And so I'm sure that, for your mom living in Roosevelt especially, she must have over the years got kind of caught up, or she heard about some of the things going on in the area. What did she ever tell you about did she experience anything, or did she hear about stuff?
She would talk about the same stuff that I experienced pretty much. I mean, the only thing that is as relevant to what I know, your direct interest is there with the Bigelow Ranch and such is, there's a hill directly above it that they call UFO Hill that the kids would go to on dates, and it's like Makeout Hill, and they'd watch the weird little Etch-a-Sketch things in the sky and stuff. But but my mom didn't really make a big deal about it. I mean, you just sort of took for granted the weird freak storms and the strange pressure changes, like really crazy, and these windstorms that would just seem to come out of nowhere. But she didn't live there the entirety of her upbringing. I mean, she lived in Provo for a bit of her life, a good chunk of my life. And so she was back and forth between Roosevelt and Utah Valley, and then she lived a couple of years in Salt Lake. But again, she was born in Roosevelt, lived the majority of her life in Roosevelt, passed on in Roosevelt, is now buried in Roosevelt. But we would talk about just basically the same stuff. I mean, I grew up in Wellington, which, as you know, is just, again, near the entrance to 9 Mile Canyon. I was just a quick BMX bike away from it. We used to ride our BMX bikes in a meteorite crater, which is a pretty cool story. But anyway, what we would witness from a distance is these crazy storms. open up over the Uinta Basin and the Book Cliffs. And, they were very, they were extraordinary. I'm sure you are well aware. Mm-hmm. So the things that she would discuss is basically the similar stuff that I would describe, and we're just kind of confirming each other's experiences pretty much. For me, most of what I could even get into depth to about what I witnessed, experienced, was chased out of a canyon by, that kind of stuff, was, I grew up in Wellington, and our the back of our home just looked right out into the desert, looking toward the Book Cliffs, right? And you could see clearly off to the kind of northeast of where I grew up, these storms that would open up that were just strange. They were like churning Charybdis of, you'd see almost like these bubbling structures coming from the center, but then you'd see the clouds and the aerial formations sort of spiraling around them, and you'd see lightning jumping in these weird spiral formations, jumping from cloud to cloud, but kind of moving in a vortexy sort of arrangement. And it was just amazing. Of course, when we were kids, we had no clue what was going on. We were just like, holy crap, what is going on over there in the northeastern sky, And then, again, we'd drive through 9 Mile Canyon back and forth between Mighton and Wellington, and there was this one time in particular where this freak storm busted up, kind of in that same vicinity, and then the pressure change is just so rapid that fog banks just like materialize, and then here we are in a Bronco just booking it as fast as we can without crashing, because it's not the safest roads, right? So we're booking it through, and meanwhile we're being chased by like a lightning storm. I was also involved in some of the early field trips out to the U.S. oil sands tar sand site there, PR Springs and such, closer to Moab and south of there. And there would be these lightning storms that would just open up in that whole area there. I've camped out there where 5 of us were huddled in a van with lightning striking all around us. Just these really extreme storms. But it was pretty crazy when we were there for my mom's funeral. We were camped in Mountain Home not camped. We were staying at a lodge there, Mountain Home, north of Arcadia, about 20 miles or so from Roosevelt. And, we went out to visit some friends on the reservation there, the Ute Reservation, Fort Duchesne area. And when we were coming back, we could see what looked like a strange sort of spiral cloud formation coming from, just south of Bottle Hollow there. And so we decided to go around it. We drove down the back roads all around the whole area. And, of course, I'm familiar enough with the stories of the ranch there that we wanted to check it out. So we actually made our way to the entrance, and our phones were malfunctioning. The clock on our vehicle changed time. Our phones went completely in and out. And then we saw this guy walking out of the gate who was dressed in what looked like a kind of like a hazmat suit, but that had been pulled down to his waist. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And this was kind of in the evening, so as dusk is approaching, and of course we couldn't get past the entry. And I've never actually been there because I hadn't been in that whole area for years. I lived in Salt Lake for 20 years and only made it to the Uinta Basin, once or twice a year to visit my mom or my family, but I didn't live there except like 1 year in the 2nd grade. So I didn't really grow up there knowing the lore of that specific place. Until I got older, and I was like, holy crap, I didn't even know that growing up there. There's just so much you don't appreciate when you're growing up in a place. You see some strange things, and you're like, oh, well, that's really weird. I hope it's aliens, Wouldn't that be neat?
Yes, it would.
Like, take me with you. Or, yeah, it's probably just the government, pulling the wool out over all the eyes or whatever. But anyway, so we went around it, and it was just weird, similar sort of strange stuff that you always hear about that location. And then, when we met with some of our friends at Fort Duchesne, we just have these conversations about, there's just these strange sort of vortex activities that happen there. And there's all this stuff that's been made about it, you talk about it and everybody. But growing up there is trippy. It does give some perspective on the stuff that we definitely did see, that all of the family members saw, the boys who would drive back and forth between Mighton and Wellington, and and the stuff that we would see, the storms, and then there were some other incidents. I mean, the stories in my family are just openly discussed about strange craft hovering, because I grew up in a coal mining culture. Uinta Basin's all oil, but Carbon County is all coal and natural gas and stuff. And so my grandparents would talk. My grandpa was a coal miner for, he was involved in the mining and in the United Mine Workers Union for over 40 years. And they would talk about craft hovering above the mines. And you could see them above the Hiawatha mine from our house in Wellington. The Hiawatha mine is kind of, west of the Price and all of that. And it looks like a big J on the mountainside, and you'd see these odd crafts doing strange things up above that. My grandma would talk about, she worked at the hospital in Price. She was a nurse, and so she would drive from Price to Wellington and late at night and get these just really odd, uneasy feelings. One time she talked about something hovering off the side of the road between Price and Wellington that was kind of like flame orange colored, sort of an egg shape hanging up off the side of the road, where it would get so hot that her fingerprints were in the steering wheel of the car. It was a plastic steering wheel, right? An old Buick. And and her fingerprints were, you could see where her handprints had embedded themselves in the driver's side of the car. So there's some bizarre thermal thing happening, a big burn patch in the cornfield off the side of the road the next day. And, they tell these stories. I didn't witness that myself, but both she and my uncle experienced it, drove right past it, as they described. And so,
and what did they,
there's that. And
did
then
she
there's
ever have any
stuff
health
later
effects?
in life I found Salt Lake.
Oh, sorry to interrupt you, but did she ever have any health effects that you know of?
Not that were ever explicitly manifest. They had a difficult time. They were coal mine. My grandpa was a coal miner, and all of their health came through my grandpa's health insurance, and they had a difficult time getting straight answers about anything. When my grandpa died, he had black lung and cancer in a whole bunch of his body, and there was all sorts of stuff that he didn't even know he had until the end.
Wow.
So,
wow. And so what do you know, a time frame of when that incident took place with the steering wheel?
oh boy, I'm trying to remember, because it was when my grandma and uncle were younger. As I recall, it was before my time, but it was a story they would tell. It's not anything that I witnessed. Mm-hmm. So, there's your other weird, grainy, nondescript Bigfoot film. And it's my memories, so there you go. It's about as credible as anything else. But I don't know, I'm trying to guess, maybe since it was before I was born. I was born in 1975, so it would have been probably late 60s, early 70s. If my uncle was an adult, so it probably would have been early 70s.
Okay.
Late 60s. That particular story.
Okay. What other stories did they share?
Mostly just the stuff about craft hovering above the Soldier Creek mine and the Hiawatha mine and the Horse Canyon mine. And because those were all the ones that my grandpa was personally involved with, and so these are the ones where he would, talk about it. They just took for granted that if it's not space aliens, then it's, just something that the military is doing, and they're 30 years ahead of anything civilians would ever know about. And so they kind of just took for granted that, yeah, it's kind of spooky and weird, but, not for us to know, and we'll just sort of grin and bear it. I guess the only one that makes me a little uncomfortable as far as my own family goes is, with all the love and due respect to my grandfather, given the perspective that he had from the various positions he held in, like, absolute leadership of the Uinta Basin. If there was anything weird going on there, even if it was federal, you'd think he'd at least have some sense of it, But these aren't anything that we discussed with my grandfather. My grandpa never discussed any on my mom's side. So I'm dealing with two different families here, right? So the one I grew up with my paternal grandparents in Carbon County. They're the ones I'm getting most of those stories from, where they just took for granted, like, yeah, there's this weird aerial phenomena that happens, like, as a thing. And we don't really know how to explain it or have an answer for it, but we're just going to, you know, they were also Mormon, and so there's a lot of things that they don't have answers for that they're willing to accept, right? And so, and you know, so, and I'm not saying that to be disrespectful. I'm just saying that there are things that we sort of take for granted that we witness and experience, and even if we can't explain them, we're not going to really dig too deep into it because it's not really for us to know, or you'll encounter obstacles, or you'll be harassed, or black helicopters will haul you away, or you'll get probed by aliens. None of that's good.
No.
Right?
Wouldn't go for any of those options, actually. Did they describe what the objects look like?
The one above the Hiawatha Mine that they described, they said had multiple levels to it. That's like vertical. So, and lights all around it, and they'd move around, kind of like a top, you know, or a gyroscopic kind of thing. That's the one that that's the main description that they would give what they witnessed over the mines. I told you the one that was sort of like egg-shaped and hot. That was the one my grandma described, and she described that pretty insistently. Now, I witnessed some stuff later in life, but this was in Salt Lake and Washington. I didn't witness any of this in Carbon or Duchesne counties. But when I was in junior high school, I posted this on your Facebook page. You'd asked a question. I know some UFO stories in Utah. When I was in junior high school, which would have been 1987 through 1989, I was in jazz band, and we'd have to walk through a wheat field. I lived in Kearns, so the west side of the Salt Lake Valley. And my elementary school, or my junior high school, was Thomas Jefferson Junior High in Kearns. I'd have to walk eastward because our home was westward of our junior high school, so I'd walk eastward toward our junior high, and I'd have to walk through a wheat field to get to it. And I was in jazz band, and our jazz band practice was really early in the morning, so I'd be walking pre-dawn through this wheat field to my junior high. And there was one morning where right before the sunrise was coming up, I saw clearly in the sky coming from the north, heading southbound, 3 triangular craft in formation. And as they got above what, you know, would be like downtown Salt Lake, from my perspective, where I was at, I was probably about 13 years old. And all of a sudden, the one that was the west, so they were in a triangular formation facing southward. So the front craft was, you know, facing south, and then they went rearward triangularly. The one that was on the right, that was kind of my direction, westward of the formation, ended up just jetting, like just taking off so fast that it left like a streak. I saw what appeared to me to be like a light streak. I don't know if it was a reflection off the sunrise or what it was, but there was like this streak left. And then I didn't see it again. The other 2 craft lined up one behind the other, and they kept moving fairly slowly over the valley, and then they appeared to just disappear. They seemed to like just disappear, and then suddenly I didn't see them. And then I'm kind of like, holy crap, like looking at the sky and what is going on? So I'm still walking to school. I'm going through this wheat field. And then suddenly I see to the left of me, a little farther south in the valley, them reappear again, move out of formation so that the one in the rear moves to the east. And then this third one, presumably the original third one, comes back so fast and then just stops dead right in formation. And then all 3 of them continue to just slowly move south over toward the Utah Valley. So that one was pretty trippy. And I mean, again, it's a grainy Bigfoot video, but I witnessed it, and I don't really need anyone to validate that for me. But then we had another experience in 2015. My partner and I were staying with some friends in Washington State. We were living in Washington State, but we were staying with some friends who was helping with some land stuff and heavy dirt, and it's all nice and stuff. Anyway, so we're sleeping outside, and we're looking up, and heading in the direction of JBLM, of Joint Base Lewis McChord, the largest military base in the world, which we were pretty close to. We saw, again, similar thing, 3 triangular craft lights on the bottom, but they were much lower. They were like barely above the tree line, and they were moving really slowly right over the top of where we were staying. They reminded me kind of like manta rays swimming, sort of. I mean, they were just gliding so effortlessly. Anyway, they just glided right over the top of the property, 40 acres that we were staying on, and my partner we were sleeping in a kind of a canopy bed out on a deck, and April jumped up out of bed. She's like, "What the hell is that?" And goes running off, and they just kept on going until they kind of disappeared over the next tree line. But they were really good size. I mean, they were about the size of, I'd say maybe smaller than a B-2 bomber. You know, those bat-winged looking bombers, but they didn't look like bat wings. Again, they reminded me more like of tailless manta rays. They were in this triangular, each one was triangular, and there were 3 of them. They were moving in a formation directly over where we were staying. So, you know, we looked into that, like, holy crap, what was that? And so we looked into what's said about those specific devices, and I'm not a major pro, just going off on what I saw. Yeah.
Was there sound?
Not that I recall. I don't recall. Hey, honey, was maybe a low hum of some kind. Was there any sound over the ones we saw in Washington? I don't recall sound.
There was not a sound. What woke me up, well, it didn't wake me up. I was already kind of awake. But what got my attention was the feeling of something moving behind me. And at first I thought it was coming through the tree line, splitting the tree line, but it wasn't. It came in front of the tree line like it opened up a portal, because like the air around it turned into like this. It looked like liquid that turned into like a bubble, and it came through that, causing the tree behind them to look like they were split, but they weren't. They were being visibly moved like a water droplet in the front. And so the feeling, it was a sensation of something there, but there was no pressure, there was no hum, almost internal, like it was vibrating internal.
Yeah,
internal.
more like a physical sensation than a sound.
Yeah, like vibrating on the
I think was
the liquid of the body. And
was how I would describe it, because there was no jet engines, right?
Sound,
you didn't hear, like we get these F-18 growlers that are just loud as hell, and there was no like sound of a jet engine.
There was no sound, there was no smell.
But there was definitely a sensation of like a presence.
So you looked over and went, oh,
yeah.
what was that?
And so were there any lights on these objects?
Yeah, the triangular ones. There was definitely a large circular light in the center of them.
There was it looked like liquid.
Yeah, sort of like a translucent bluish sort of light underneath the bottom, and then there were, I believe there were lights in the corners.
Of the smaller ones.
Yeah.
But the skin itself was kind of like a fuzzy black. There was no designs on it. It was almost as if you could touch. It was almost like it was a sea creature.
Yeah, it looked like a ray, like a sea ray animal, kind of. I mean, at least
I'm sure the spacecraft.
in a more cut lines, it wasn't biological, but we could tell that it was fairly smooth black, and there was one big kind of orb-ish light in the center bottom. And then I don't recall if it was in all of them, but I do recall seeing lights in the corners of at least one of them or more. I can't confirm that.
And was there a pattern to the lights? Were they solid? Do you remember?
Solid. I don't remember any blinking.
Okay.
No blinking.
And how close were they to you? If you could, I know that's hard to remember.
Well, you can imagine how tall a cedar or a Douglas fir tree is, and they were literally right at the top of the tree line, or near the top of the tree line. April saw them before I did. She drew my attention to them. I mean, you could feel sort of an uneasy tension, but I didn't see them. She drew my attention. She's like, "What the hell is that?" And I'm looking up, and literally coming from I'm trying to think. I think we were east of JVOM, so they would have been coming from the west to the east. They were heading in the direction of the military base. So, but they were pretty low. I mean, they were low enough to see clearly. I mean, the craft themselves were probably bigger than the house that we were at, and it was a 2-story straw bale, lodge. I'm trying to think of how many square feet, probably about 1,500 square foot footprint on the house.
And so did you get the impression that this was, I mean, did you feel like it was maybe military or that this was too advanced?
Well, I'm not an expert on military aircraft. My wife is in the military, so she has a better sense of that than I do. But, it wasn't anything that I have ever experienced, and it's something that later on I came to see the controversy over whether these are extraterrestrial or whether they're military or whether they're military derived from non-terrestrial stuff. It didn't look like anything I was accustomed to, that's for sure, but I can't really claim enough authority to be an expert.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't just want to parrot confirmation bias from quack sources.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, I want to believe. So I'll disclose that, right?
Yeah. I think everybody listening.
I want there to be extraterrestrial. There was a long time in my life when I wanted Kolob to be real, and hey, come get us, take me with you. But whatever.
Well, it is.
If it happens, it happens.
Yeah. No, it is. It is interesting. Have you had any other experiences?
Not that I would say. Not with anything that I would consider to be like extraterrestrial craft. So, we could get into paranormal, supernatural stuff, and sure. But when it comes to, it's contributed to a sort of speculation, like when we're talking about things like extraterrestrials, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are we just talking about things that exist in the same dimensional planes that we can normally observe through our perception? Or is there a phenomenon where things are coming, from where there's a trans-dimensional thing happening, right? Because there's an awful lot of ghost stories in my family, and I've experienced some interesting supernatural stuff, including since my mom passed. Doors opening, things being left where we didn't confirming that we didn't leave them there, but we're finding things relocated. There's all sorts of little stuff like that, and all sorts of stories in my family of, spirits returning and ancestors who've passed coming and sitting on people's beds and communing with them. And, you hear all of that kind of stuff. But to what extent is that really as relevant to this question of are those spacecraft or not?
Right. And I think that's the one thing that most of us kind of question is okay, where does one thing stop and the other begin? And for me, it's I just can't, I can't say this is paranormal. This means this is Grandma Moses. This means, or this is E.T. I don't have enough information to make, that, to make say either way. But it's something as of right now that is unexplainable.
Right. Yeah. Or, to whatever extent we can give a speculation, it brings me comfort to think that now that my mom has passed, she's free to, have the back of her besties and wreak vengeance upon her enemies from the afterlife. And I really do take comfort in that. So I don't just want to be imposing my own, thing that brings me comfort on something that can either be verified or that it's even really relevant that it be verified. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Do I really have a responsibility to alert the rest of the world that, I experienced this? Maybe if I experienced it and it's all true or whatever, maybe it's best that I don't just go out broadcasting it. Even though I'm talking to you right now about this, I can't turn around and say, hey, everybody, here's where it is, here's what to do about it, and please go pollute that beautiful desert some more with your tourism.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really want to go that direction with it, but at the same time, if people are speculating in the wrong direction and it's a damaging direction, if I can contribute something positive that says, no, these are just kind of natural phenomena, and if you just go with it, if you're on the list, the aliens will say, hey, let's go show you Earth from space. If you're not on the list, then don't sweat,
Right.
You stay out of everyone else's way. and stop wrecking Moab with your noisy vehicles.
Oh, I love Moab. I've got to get down there this summer. Utah is such a spectacular place. I feel lucky to be here, and it is, as you know, with all the strange sightings, and then the Skinwalker Ranch stuff and things. I love learning about the history and the lore and seeing how people react in specific areas. And so that is interesting that, up in the Roosevelt area, you either get people that are really, really into that and are just like, okay, that's another day.
Yeah. So now you had told me that was it your husband, ex-husband, had worked there when Robert Bigelow was running that place?
Mm-hmm.
Is that true?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So I haven't had time to go back and listen to everything I've wanted to listen to, but we did have that direct conversation a while back. How did that? What's the status of that?
Bigelow sold the property back in 2016, and so that's the new team, Brandon Fugel and the Admantium team that have taken over the ranch and things. And so, but the Bigelow days were very interesting in and of the fact that the people that were employed to live on the ranch, when reading reports from multiple investigators or security guards at the ranch, their main concern was really identifying who the people were that were coming to the gate and getting license plate numbers and seeing how many of them there were. And so it wasn't, they were never given adequate equipment to study what was allegedly at the ranch. And so, which I just found quite interesting. And the more I've looked into things, I have to ask myself, okay, was this just a story that was inserted into the narrative? Interestingly enough, thanks to somebody who's listening to the show tonight, I was sent an article about a place that was almost identical. And I wonder, knowing the Bigelow crew, did they perhaps pick up on that story and then use that to seed that into the community? So there are all sorts of questions that I have. And then, I also look back at Dr. Frank Salisbury's work with Junior Hicks and things. And there definitely, people are seeing things. What is it? I don't know. And, what took place at Skinwalker Ranch and what is going on at Skinwalker Ranch. Is that being used as, a red herring of sorts? So lots of things. It definitely, my opinions of things have changed drastically over the course of, the past few years.
Right. Junior Hicks. Yeah, he was,
yeah, he was I'm
trying to remember, because I have friends, because my mom went to school, she grew up in Roosevelt. And we have friends, Indian friends who are in leadership there, talking about how they had a teacher there as well at Union High School who was a science teacher.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That was Dan Hicks.
Interesting. Yeah, and Junior was a teacher as well, a science teacher, and then he was an electrician, and then he began, collecting all of the reports back in the 60s, and he was a real great leader in that way, because he gave people a comfortable place to talk about that and to keep track of what was taking place, keeping a history on things.
Yeah, I know he was beloved by his students
and the community. He was just such a warm wonderful gentleman, and I just really, it was such a pleasure for me to know him and just to hear him talk. And Junior had, I think, more questions about what was taking place than anyone, and he also understood that there was some shady dealings going on, which I thought was very funny. It was not a huge fan of Robert Bigelow.
Right. Well, there's always been some questions I've had, especially as I've gotten older in my life. See, there's some things that I also have learned, that I mention with respect to my family, but, there's things you don't learn about your own ancestry until someone passes, right? So they die, and then the things that you didn't know about them when they were alive start to sort of come out, right? Like my grandfather, for example. Wallace Ralph Shields is his name. And again, he was the mayor of Roosevelt for a couple terms, was on the city council for a long time, was very involved in city politics, but he also chaired the Uinta Basin Industrial Convention, which is, that's kind of it in the center of an oil field when it comes to having some perspective on what happens in that geography, right? And there's stuff that, my grandpa was in the Navy in World War II, during World War II. He was in naval intelligence, and he retired a lieutenant commander. And it's kind of an astonishing story. I produced my own podcast about it. I'm kind of 3 episodes into it, but the first couple episodes I talk a little bit about this. But when the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, my grandfather was literally on the radio with the pilot, with the plane, the Enola Gay. He was running the radio station off of Guam, and he wrote about this in these memoirs that we were all given after he passed on. And so I look at that. This is something, again, I never knew about my grandpa. And part of a coincidence for me that comes out of that situation, and why it's relevant, and why I think that there's stuff I would like to know more about, including my own family's perspective and possible knowledge about the details of stuff that goes on in that place, right? At Bigelow Ranch or whatever else, because there's other stories, there's other locations around there that the Native people talk about where, they consider spiritual experiences happen that are otherworldly. And so my grandpa passed in 2005. For many years, for a few years prior to that, I had been working for an intercultural organization. It was a tribal-led organization called Shundahai Network. And it had originally founded in 1994 in Washington, D.C. as a hospitality house for tribal leaders who would come to Washington, D.C. to lobby on behalf of, tribal interests. And a particular interest of theirs was opposition to military testing in general, but specifically in the Great Basin bioregion. The founder of Shundahai Network was a man named Corbin Harney, and since the Manhattan Project, he had been fighting against the U.S. government and first the Atomic Energy Commission and the Department of Energy and such to try to stop. I mean, he was a leader in the Aboriginal opposition to nuclear testing in Nevada, the Nevada test site. And, he was very instrumental in helping galvanize indigenous opposition worldwide to nuclear testing. And in fact, he and leadership in Kazakhstan, which is where the Soviet Union had its inland nuclear test site, the Semipalatinsk nuclear test site, he and Aboriginal leadership in Kazakhstan came together, formed an organization called Nevada Semipalatinsk, which was a transnational solidarity organization of Aboriginal peoples fighting against the occupation government's testing of atomic weapons, nuclear weapons, in those inland desert test sites. Anyway, so he founded Shundahai Network in 1994. You could fast forward almost a decade, and through a series of events, I came to work for him. And then I went on ultimately to be the executive director of the organization he founded, which was transcultural. And our board was 5 Aboriginal members, 4 non-Native members. And so it was this transcultural opposition to the nuclear industry in general. But anyway, so So I'm directing his organization from 2003 until he passed in 2007. I continued on until 2008. So here I am employed by an Aboriginal leader of the global movement against nuclear technology in general, not just weapons, but also, civilian power and all of the impacts that the whole nuclear chain has on especially Aboriginal peoples, from extraction all the way through to weapons, to power, to waste disposal, to all of these things. I worked very closely in campaigns with tribal people to oppose all these nuclear facilities and was part of a big coalition. Anyway, that coalition ended up choosing me as a 3-person delegate to go to Washington, D.C. with two tribal leaders, women, Lori Goodman from Dene Cares and Kathy Sanchez from the Tewa Women United Tribal Environmental Watch Alliance, which is based in the same valley that houses the Los Alamos nuclear complex. So tribal leaders from where the first atomic bomb was detonated, and then a tribal leader from the Dene or Navajo communities that are fighting for radiation compensation from uranium mining, and then me as the 3rd delegate, were selected from this coalition. This is all relevant. Sorry if I sound like I'm meandering a little bit, but okay. After 9/11, there was a coalition that came together called the People of Color and Disenfranchised Environmental Health Initiative. It represented 19 different communities nationwide that were the hosts of America's WMD complex, weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, and nuclear. Okay, it was financed under the Peace Development Fund, based in Amherst, Massachusetts, and the organization that I was directing was one of those 19 organizations. It was primarily tribal, Latino, African American, and disenfranchised white communities that were the literal hosts and therefore experienced the environmental impacts of America's WMD complex, again, chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons. We were directly downwind of the Nevada test site, but we're working with tribal communities who are dealing with uranium mining in Washington and Arizona and Utah, and we're dealing with African American communities that are dealing with chemical weapons in Tennessee and in Utah, and we're dealing, there's all these communities coming together who are dealing with some aspect of the process. So anyway, in 2005, they selected representatives of 3 of the organizations, and so I was selected as one of those 3 people to go to the United Nations General Assembly. They were hosting in Manhattan, was convening the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference 2005. Starts on May Day, okay, May 1st, 2005. There is a march from the UN General Assembly building to Central Park in Manhattan, and there were over 500,000 people, over 500,000 people in this march. Our delegation, our 3-person delegation, was chosen to be in the second line of that march in 2005. So I've got like Daniel Ellsberg getting caught in my banner, you know what I mean? He was in the first march, standing directly next to the 2 men who were at the front and center of that march were the mayors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 2005. The mayor of Hiroshima was Tadatoshi Akiba. And I touched his shoulder. I could put my hand on Tadatoshi Akiba's shoulder with my right arm without stretching my arm, right? That's how close I was to the mayor of Hiroshima on May 1st, 2005. My grandpa passed on 6 months later on winter solstice, December 21st, 2005. And after his funeral, we ended up getting copies of his. And the reason I was selected is because I was directing this organization that was working in the Great Basin on nuclear issues, and primarily led by the indigenous opposition, the Aboriginal opposition to the nuclear everything. And so here we are in this march. So we're doing all this campaign work. We would organize gatherings. If you're familiar with the Peace Camp at the Nevada test site, the protest camp that's been going there since the early 50s, for several years, my name was on the bottom line of all of the liabilities of that Peace Camp. So anyway, so we would organize gatherings at the Nevada test site. Whenever there was a big protest at the Nevada test site for years, over Mother's Day or over Indigenous Peoples Day, aka Columbus Day or whatever, again, my name was the signature at the bottom of any problems that would happen there. A lot of people would be arrested. There'd be civil resistance activities, you know what I mean, protests of all sorts. And So we're doing all this work. I go to the UN in May Day 2005. 6 months later, Grandpa dies in Salt Lake. And then we get these copy of his memoirs, where I come to find out that his voice could be heard in the plane that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima.
Wow.
I didn't know this about my grandfather until he died. 6 months after I was within arm's reach of the mayor of Hiroshima. I mean, we were conducting workshops at the United Nations on the impact of the nuclear industry on Aboriginal communities. We had people from all over the world who were dealing. I was meeting with people from the Congo who were dealing with uranium mining in Africa. I was meeting people from Bangladesh who were, had Indian government military occupation of their Aboriginal territories for control of the uranium supplies there. I'm meeting with politicians from the Marshall Islands who are dealing with the impact of Pacific nuclear testing. And they're all attending these workshops. I mean, I actually bartended the after party at the UN church building across the street at the end of this thing. Ended up meeting people from all over the world who are dealing with the impact of the nuclear industry. Okay, so I do all of this in May of 2005, and then my grandpa dies, and then I come to find out that he was like, literally his voice was in the damn plane.
Wow.
Like, wow. And so I look at this, right? I look at this and what I've come to learn about things like Bigelow Ranch and the kinds of stuff that is known to happen in the Uinta Basin that's extraordinary. And then my grandpa was like the grand poobah of the Uinta Basin for all of that time. And, thank you for hearing that. It's
really important.
It's a little mind-boggling to me. And I deal with it a little bit. And then, I was a big fan of the X-Files TV series, and I marry a woman who looks like Scully, right? So this kind of freaks me out.
Lucky guy. Well, I have to ask you, when you were doing...
And it's just as weird.
Like with the nuclear protesting, did you or your group ever receive any blowback? Were there people that were trying to discourage you from doing this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, before a major gathering, my office got completely broken into and ransacked in Salt Lake. This would, I believe, have been the same year, 2005, when we were preparing for the Mother's Day gathering. There was a Mother's Day gathering at the Nevada test site, which there is every year, hosted by the Western Shoshone National Council. It's their treaty-recognized territory that the Nevada test site's in the geographic center of. So I'm working under the guidance and direction of the Aboriginal peoples whose treaty territory encompasses the Nevada test site. It's literally, if you look at Nosogobia, or the Western Shoshone Treaty Territory, 1863 Treaty of Ruby Valley, the Nevada test site is directly in the geographic center of that, as is the Yucca Mountain Project that's adjacent to that. Nellis Air Force Base is right in the geographic center of Nosogobia, the Western Shoshone Treaty Territory. So it was under their authority that I was doing anything. In fact, it was primarily a Western Shoshone organization that then became transcultural and non-tribal influences became, involved. And it was actually sort of a morphing in the United States of the nuclear freeze movement and the American peace test movement, and with an international Aboriginal, expanded out to embrace a transnational sort of thing. But we experienced disruption. I mean, most of my activity, you need to understand, was after 9/11. And so, I became introduced to Corbin Harney, who was the founder of Shindai Network, and he's been fighting the nuclear industry, like I say, since roughly the Manhattan Project. Well, not roughly the Manhattan Project. When they were trying to establish the Nevada test site, he and another fellow who was the chief of the Western Shoshone National Council, Raymond Yao, they were leadership in trying to stop the Nevada test site from being established in the beginning. And then they went on to, when that was impossible, they went on to work with the University of Nevada's anthropology departments to identify and remove and relocate as many of the ancestral native sites as could be identified and removed and such before establishing the Nevada test site. So the person that I was employed by and working for was the person who led the effort to both stop that from being established and then to to conserve whatever could be conserved before we ended up detonating, more atomic and nuclear weapons than anywhere else on the planet.
And so what pushback?
There's definitely opposition.
What pushback did he receive? Because I'm interested in this because there is, I've been really looking into Yucca Mountain and some of the people that were involved in potentially creating these groups of people that were collecting dossiers on people and then trying to discredit people or push people away from speaking out and protesting.
Well, a best example that I can give you of some pushback, one really good example is my origin story with Corbin. When I met Corbin, I was a student at the University of Utah. I studied political science there, and I chaired a committee. I was the Contemporary Issues Chair of Union Programs, so my job was to organize political events on campus and to make arrangements for like traveling dignitaries and such when they'd come to give talks, presentations and such. So Corbin was brought to my attention. I mean, I was already aware of the stuff going on in Western Shoshone country. They were fighting mining and all sorts of things. But the first time I ever actually personally met Corbin Harney was he was touring campuses, and so representatives of his came to me to ask if I would help organize events for him to speak at the University of Utah and such. So yeah, of course, this is great. And so one of the campus speaking venues was underwritten by Rio Tinto, as you probably know, is a big transnational mining company that is very controversial in its relationship with Aboriginal cultures all over the world, right? And so they have a lot of mining operations in Utah. They're the owner of the Kennecott copper mine there, west of Salt Lake Valley. But this one of the speaking venues on campus was underwritten by them. And so at the last minute, that venue was covering the lodging for Corbin and his assistant. And it was 4 days. They were supposed to stay 3 nights and 4 days. We had a hotel booked for them and everything. And then as a result of, I guess, the story I got was that when Rio Tinto found out who this was, who was going to be speaking, they threatened to pull underwriting for the venue, and so the venue pulled the lodging money. And when the lodging money got pulled, the only other alternative was for Corbin to stay with me at my apartment for 4 days. So Corbin, who's this internationally renowned Aboriginal opponent of the nuclear industry, Amnesty International cited their work, and especially the Dan sisters, who are in northern, that same tribal group fighting all the same stuff, as one of their 4 big environmental justice campaigns worldwide. I mean, it's not a small thing. Corbin ends up staying with me for 4 days because, again, of pushback from an industry. Now, this wasn't specifically the Department of Energy or, the last time I was ever actually detained at the Nevada test site, it was under the supervision of Northrop Grumman the day they took over from Bechtel, the management of the Nevada test site. But it's that kind of thing. They pull your money. Spooky things happen. There's infiltration and such that happens. There's disruptive behavior. People trying to scuttle your events, your activities, your campaign work. My office got broken into in 2005 again. My apartment got broken into in 2002, and I'm concerned about things that happened around that. We had an elder on the Goshute Reservation die a mysterious death after a Nuclear Regulatory Commission hearing on a lonely road, claiming he was drunk driving and he'd been sober for 26 years. The Western Shoshone Defense Project. This wasn't so much fighting nuclear testing. This was more the mining, but it's all in the same geographical context, and it's the same cultural groups fighting essentially similar interests. I ended up showing up as the charred remains of a vehicle that had just mysteriously burst into flame of a tribal leader. We were called in to deal with some of the consequences of that. Yeah. I mean, I can't really speak for Corbin and I have friends who've had their bones broken by the police. People who, the first hired me to even work for Shundai Network was, has had his ribs busted by the police, but he was, locking himself to underneath a van, taking workers into the Nevada test site. So,
wow.
I mean, the people who oppose these things are pretty unyielding themselves. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so as far as pushback, I was jailed by Homeland Security in 2003. And I've been shaken down at my home by the FBI 3 times.
Wow.
Once when I lived in twice when I lived in downtown Salt Lake. After I moved to Washington, I had both FBI and Homeland Security show up at the places I was at. But that wasn't specifically for me. It's just that when you're in this side of opposing the things that heavy industrial military America does in the world, you can pretty much expect to have your life disrupted, right?
Right. And so
I was jailed in 2003 by Homeland Security, and that still lost me jobs a decade later.
Oh my gosh. And I have to ask you, because when you look at, the Uinta Basin and some of the things that are going on there, do you see any red flags with what's taking place there?
Oh, I can't really say any more than normal. By red flags, I was a little bit concerned when I saw what the To the Stars Academy was doing there. That seemed to me to be, I guess, by red flags. When you get people at that level trying to popularize something, that raises a red flag for me. You know what I mean? If they're trying to make it cool and hip and stuff and roll out the publicity about something in a way that's like more like mass entertainment than serious, like, hey, we really got to get to the bottom of this and make sure, the aliens aren't going to come harvest us for food or something. I'm just talking tongue in cheek here, but more the red flag for me is how it's the way that it's exploited.
And so yes, you were talking about the pushback and things with the To the Stars and how that kind of raised your hackles a little bit, and I wanted to ask you too, because I think this is very interesting when you look at the industry in the area, in the Uinta Basin and things, and the potential that people are being exposed to radiation and different things. What are your thoughts on that?
The first thing that occurs to me is I have, especially throughout my adult life, come to be pretty revolted at how the public is just allowed to be harmed by industry, by the military. And there seems to be this mentality that the things that persist beyond we individual generations of mortal squishies, things like heavy industry, the monuments to capitalism, or the monuments to human achievement, the high technology, all these things. There's this belief that stuff is going to persist beyond each generation of humans. And so there's like a higher premium. And that's literally what capitalism is, right? You place a higher premium on the machines than you do the people, and on the monuments to industrial progress more than whatever collateral damage is done by those monuments. And so the public isn't, from my perspective, and I know that every country and every sort of ruling class, which there are various in various countries, and they configure themselves in coalitions and big things like NATO and all this, that the ruling class always tells its subordinates that its leadership is the greatest in the world, and that culture is the greatest that the world has ever seen. America is not unique in that sense, but to the extent that we've gone on to become like the global hegemon, right? The most powerful country in a unipolar world that's disintegrating, but has been since, through the Cold War and all of this. We're taught to believe that no matter what our system does to achieve its greatness, we're not to question it. If it affects our health, if it wipes out, like commits genocide or kills 1 million people for oil in Mesopotamia or whatever, we're still taught to kind of applaud that because we're somehow exceptional. And if we have to sacrifice our own health, if we have to accept that, even if we know or have a sneaking suspicion that we're like being completely BS'd about how the industrial operations that are going on around us, we can have the example of the Uinta Basin, right? Or where I grew up in Carbon County, or where any of the other people that I've worked with over the years who have lived in the vicinity of chemical weapons depots, et cetera, that we're sort of just taught to either like silently accept it, don't go in too deep about it. A person who I would recommend talking to who's very intelligent on this, you can find her through Facebook, is Jennifer Varick. She directs an organization called HOME, Healing Ourselves in Mother Earth, and they were very instrumental in exposing the U.S. Geological Survey's false studies of the Yucca Mountain Project, the hydrological studies at Yucca Mountain that were claimed, they had, as you probably are aware, the USGS had 2 different books, one that said there is no water infiltration that could expose people to harms from the high-level nuclear waste that would be stored at Yucca Mountain. And then you've got another set of USGS books that are saying there's water everywhere, right? And you've got Jennifer and her crew and others that they were affiliated with who did all of the hydrological studies throughout southern Nevada and California there, the Amargosa Aquifer, that showed radionuclide infiltration from Pacific nuclear testing, right? So where the U.S. government is saying, oh, no, there's no problem, it's like lying is the standard, not the rule. Deny everything is like, that is the actual rule. Everything else is sort of corollary or peripheral to that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So you come up in a culture where you literally, like, you're so steeped in it that the air you breathe is deception.
Right. And so let me ask you, what was Harry Reid's role in all of that?
Well, I never directly dealt with Harry Reid as a person. To the best of my understanding is, Harry Reid, of course, is the senator from the district that includes Nevada Test Site and Area 51 and Nellis and all of that, Yucca Mountain. And I really can't speak as well to Harry Reid personally. I don't know. I mean, he reminds me of my grandpa in that sense, an elderly Mormon guy who knows everything and might insinuate some things, but can't say many other things, and kind of gives you the little wink and the nod like, yeah, there'll be some stuff that'll be disclosed, but I can't really talk about it. Oh, I have my suspicions, but we can't really talk about it. Oh, we're learning more and more every day, but we can't really talk about it, Yeah,
and I was just wondering because, since he is, he was, involved with nuclear, with Yucca Mountain and things, just kind of, I would be interesting to dive a little bit deeper in that. And also I think, again, some of the projects that are taking place in the Uinta Basin, now are going to be interesting to see. And the life, it is interesting in some of these places that, there was I'm sure you read the article in Rolling Stone from a few years back where there were several stillbirths in the area and things were taking place that were affecting people's health. And I just wonder, because you have people on the Skinwalker show that have been, they've said that they've had dangerous levels of radiation and different things, you wonder what the health effects are and what is causing some of those health effects. Is it truly UFOs, or is it something else going on and UFOs is just a cover?
Well, I know. See, speaking with tribal friends, it's known that throughout that area there is really heightened what is described by the Aboriginal folks as spiritual energy, right? there are vortexes. There is just a common standard kind of daily perception that things that happen in that area are of a supernatural nature. That there's a strange sort of dimensional anomaly that occurs there. And that's cool. And if that's natural and that's something that just happens, or even if it's, extraterrestrial consciousness manipulating matter or whatever, I don't know. I'm not doing it, so it's hard. I'm just more speculating than anything. But it's, it's recognized by, the Aboriginal people of the area that it is a place of heightened power. And if that's a power that's being exploited, manipulated, tapped, somehow modified, tampered with in whatever way by humans, we can look into all that's been said about it and look into what we, not being, the military personnel or, personnel working at Bigelow Ranch or whatever, we can, not being those people, we can hear all of the stuff that you might hear and recognize that there's stuff going on there no matter what. If it's harmful to humans on its own naturally without being tampered with, then, that's one thing and we can navigate that. But if it is being tampered with, and it is something where you take a natural phenomenon and then you pervert it through technology or try to harness it in ways that can't be harnessed, therefore the consequences of interference are harmful, then there's that too, right? So I'm kind of like just throwing out more ideas than stating any conclusive anything. Mm-hmm. But it's already known by Aboriginal people that it's an area of heightened energy. It's an area of kind of supernatural by our common perception phenomenon. So, if we're using UFOs as a cover story for the military poisoning everybody with radiation, maybe. I don't know. I can't really speak conclusively to that, but we can't rule it out either, right?
Right.
Without actual evidence, and I don't have that evidence, so.
Oh, it's also fascinating.
All I have is stories. I have more questions than anything, see? Because, again, even though we would witness these things growing up there, the sky appearing to open up and freak lightning storms and all of this strange stuff, even though we did witness those things and it was holy crap weird, and then later in life you come to be like, oh, well, there's these, there's all this reporting that's going on and there's all this speculation and UFO conspiracies and Skinwalker Ranch and all that stuff. You learn about these things later in life. All that really does for me is it just gives me more questions, but most of my questions end up having to do with, and it's very personal, but all of my questions end up having to do with my own family's relationship to it. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. Like, I don't understand, and I know I'll never get an answer from any of my family members, and if they're probably not listening to this, odds are they're not going to. They're very kind of, progressive-minded Mormons. They're not like way too superstitious and contrived. They're middle class, really good people, contribute very well to the community and such. But even if they did know stuff, I know that there's stuff that happens in that area that they know that I don't. Stuff that I would hear from my mom. But my mom has a history of some health challenges that you can't really get past information any farther from her. So she might tell you something, but the family's not going to confirm that. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I end up just having all of these questions about if all of this weird stuff is going on there, and if it is, the military-industrial complex using UFOs as a cover story for some BS that they're doing that's poisoning people. There's not really a way for me to get that information short of dropping what I'm doing with the rest of my life mm-hmm. and devoting myself full time into it. So, I got to kind of scrape around where I can find it. But I know what I've seen. I know the strange stuff that I've experienced even since discovering, some roles that my grandfather has played in that area and in world events. But again, that just leaves me with more questions than anything.
Right.
All I've got is the evidence of my own eyes. But again, it's just another grainy Bigfoot video.
I love that. That is awesome. And I mean, this has been such a fascinating conversation. I thank you for doing this, and you have given me some great information, really important information. And sometimes, you move away from UFOs, but when you see the bigger picture of things, it's important to get that lay of the land as well. So I really appreciate you doing this, and I will have to have you back and tell everybody where they can find you and listen to your podcast.
Well, my podcast, it's a little labor of love. It's called 369 Light Switch. All one word, 369 LIGHTSWITCH. Currently, I can be found on SoundCloud. And I also have a Facebook page, which you just look up 369 Light Switch on Facebook, and it's all right there. My first 2 episodes are called Grandpa Strangelove, How I Learned to Love Worrying and Stop the Bomb.
I love that.
And it's basically, it starts out with the story of within 18 months of each other, I stood beside the graves of Corbin Harney, who led the global Aboriginal fight against the nuclear industry. And that was 18 months after my grandfather's funeral, who could be heard in the cockpit of the Enola Gay. So it begins with that juxtaposition of standing at the funerals of both of these men within 18 months of each other. And then it kind of tells the whole story about, how I came through that and some realizations that I've come to through that whole experience. And anyway, 369 Light Switch, all one word.
Okay.
That's the name of the podcast.
Oh, that is so cool. We've got to talk. We have to talk. And thank you so much for being here. That is just what an incredible thing. So I just want to again thank Peter for joining me on the show. I think if you listen to each of my shows, you understand that there are things that I'm bringing out that all connect a larger puzzle together, and it is important when you're looking at specific areas and Harry Reid and different people that were involved in things, and there might be a little bit more going on than just simple UFO disclosure. And so I definitely recommend you paying attention and understanding that I bring on people that have something that you need to hear. My next guest actually is somebody that I've known for a long, long time. And he's not going to tell anybody just how long I've known him. But, well, it's been since high school. But other than that, it's just, we're not going to mention the year or anything. But I wanted to bring Travis on because obviously he's in Utah. And I remember a few years ago talking to him about an experience that he had that really just kind of, it was really interesting. And again, I think you need to hear this. And so Travis, thanks for finally coming on the show. What's up?
Oh, not much. Have a good night.
Yeah. So so tell me about your sighting. Tell us about your sighting.
Well, it was quite a long time ago. It was probably 1991, I think. And basically, I had a friend who, on the west side of the Great Salt Lake, there's a couple companies out in the wintertime, and I don't know if people know, but in the Great Salt Lake, the only thing that lives in there is brine shrimp. And during the wintertime, they actually breed, and their eggs float up to the top of the water. So these companies go out there and they have these flat boats and they vacuum this stuff off the water, and it's really high dollar merchandise for fish food and stuff like that. So they have to guard it with guns and do all this stuff. So they have a couple camps out there, and that's all that's out there. So if you're on the west side of the Great Salt Lake, there's one road that goes along the west part of the lake. So you got the lake, the road, and then nothing but desert really to Nevada. So my buddy was working out there, and he was guarding these eggs, and he called me and said, "Hey, I've got some beers and some T-bone steaks, come out." And it's like midnight, and it was a Friday night, and it was I think it was like January, so it was cold, and it had been snowing. And a roommate of mine had an old Buick, late 70s Buick, so a big giant boat car. And my one roommate, who is a very religious guy, doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, doesn't do any of that stuff. He basically wanted to go with me. So we left and we headed out there. So it took us a while to get out there. And, it's probably roughly about 1 in the morning by the time we got out there. Pitch black. The weather was clear, so we could see all the way into the atmosphere. And as we're driving down the freeway, we get off on this exit called the Lakeside exit, and we start going down the road, and it's paved for a little ways. And then it actually turns into dirt, but this time of the year with the snow, obviously, it was covered in snow. So if you're heading north along this road on the west side of the Great Salt Lake, you've got the lake on your right-hand side, and you've got nothing but sagebrush and snow and desert on the left side. And so basically, we're going down this road, and you have to go for quite a ways because the lake's huge. And as we're driving down, I see what looked like a fire in the middle of the road, kind of off to the left side of the road maybe. And it was probably about 3 feet high. And I completely stopped the car, and I said to my buddy, I said, I wonder if somebody got stranded out here and they lit a fire to keep warm. He's like, yeah, let's go check it out. So we started moving closer to it, and as we got closer to it, it pulled up off the ground and turned into a round sphere and started heading right toward us. And I completely stopped the car at this point, and then it split into 2 spheres, came on my side of the vehicle about 3 feet away from the vehicle. And the orbs looked like they were really lit up, and you can actually kind of put your hand through them, almost like they didn't have a surface. And as they came past me, they turned red and shot up into the sky and were out of the atmosphere within about 4 seconds. And I've never seen anything move so fast, and we freaked out, to say the least. And it was a pretty scary experience, but there was definitely nothing man-made for sure.
I mean, and so how long did it take you to calm down after seeing that?
Well, we freaked out. I spun the car around on this little dirt road, started heading the other direction. I figured it was closer to get to the camp, so I spun the car around again, and we're flying down the snow-packed road going 65 miles an hour, and I'm yelling at my roommate. I'm like, you need to watch out the window. We're going to get abducted. And so we're flying down the road like 65 miles an hour. We get to the camp. We come flying in there sideways. Tell my friend that we just saw something that may have been some kind of alien craft or probe or something. He didn't even believe us at all. But even to this day, every time I see my buddy that I was out there with, that's the first thing he says to me is, remember that night? And yeah, it was crazy. And I've looked into a lot of it afterwards, and a lot of people have seen the same thing out there in the same situation.
So can you elaborate on that? Because, I mean, that is, again, we've got so many fascinating areas in Utah, and I know we tend to focus a lot on, the Uinta Basin and things, but, I mean, the Great Salt Lake, that whole area is very unique.
It is, because the lake is huge. I don't remember the exact dimensions of it, but it's something like, 20 by 60 miles or something like that. So it's a very large lake. And it's very shallow. There's nothing out there. And if you think about it logically, it's the perfect spot for, if an alien wanted to be in some kind of, hidden mode observing things, that's the perfect place to be, And, several people I've talked to have seen, they've been out there, not directly in that same spot, but roughly west of the Great Salt Lake, and they've seen those same type of orbs, but they've seen 4 or 6 of them, and so it's really interesting that seems to be kind of a hotspot. And even all these years later, I've wanted to go back out and kind of recreate that entire evening to see if I could see that again, but I haven't gotten the guts to do it yet. So
hey, let's go.
Yeah, let's go.
I know. I mean, I'm up for an adventure. I need one.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah, and it's such a stunning area out there. And for, I mean, people that have not been to Utah and had the pleasure of being around that area. I mean, first of all, the Great Salt Lake is absolutely, I mean, it stinks certain times of year. That's because of the brine shrimp, but it's like a Martian landscape almost, especially being out there, and, you know, by the salt flats and different things. And it really, and then you've got no light pollution. And so you look up and it's like the whole, you know, I mean, the sky just opens up. It's really, really stunning.
It does, and you know, and it really seems like a really logical place. And I think about it logically. If I was an extraterrestrial, you know, coming to another planet, doing what they're doing, I would want to stay in areas like that too, where you could get away quickly. Nobody can get to you fast. You can still do the kind of things you need to do, whether it's scientific or whatever they're up to. You know, but it definitely made me a believer for sure. And there's no way anything can move out of the atmosphere that quickly.
And so do you think that there could be some sort of natural phenomenon?
No. Nope, because the weather was clear. There wasn't even any clouds in the sky. And but it had snowed. And you know, a lot of the times after it snows and the storm goes away, you have that super clear night sky because all of the pollution and everything's taken out of the sky by the storm. And so literally I could see it through the window going up into the atmosphere until I just couldn't see it anymore. And like I said, within 4 seconds I couldn't see it anymore. So.
And how close did it get to your car?
3 feet from my side of the vehicle. So I saw it really close up.
And what was from when you first saw you saw the fire, what you thought was a fire, I mean, how quickly did that unfold? It sat there. Even when I stopped the vehicle, it looked just like a campfire. I'm not kidding. Like, it looked just like the flames. And I had no doubt in my mind that it was a fire. And but as soon as I started moving the vehicle forward was when it moved. And I don't know if it was trying to distract me or what it was trying to do, but I think once it realized I was coming towards it, it had to do something. So. Wow. I mean, I know everything probably happens so quickly, but when you're in a stressful situation like that, time seems to slow down. But did you remember, I mean, were there any smells or sounds associated with the object that you could remember? No, because I had the window rolled up on the vehicle, and I didn't roll it down until after it took off into the atmosphere. And they were electric windows, and so right as it got to the back of the vehicle and turned red, that's when I hit the down button on the window. So the window was coming down right as it took off, so it was probably halfway down, and I stuck my head out the window so I could see where it was going. Wow. And I thought I was seeing things. Like, I could not believe what I was seeing. I really thought I was seeing things. That must have just been really, I mean, it happened so quickly, and then you're just, you and your friend are just sitting there. I mean, and you still don't know what that was, and it must have been unnerving because it was coming right at you in sort of, I don't know, a defensive type of movement. Yeah, I think in some ways it was trying to maybe trick us a little bit that it was headlights coming at us when it split into two. And but once it came past the side of the vehicle, I mean, I think it meant to maybe take off a little bit sooner than it did, because I don't think it judged how fast I was coming at it. So, but there was nowhere for anybody to go. And when I spun the vehicle around, there's nothing there, so it's not like it really was a vehicle. There wasn't even room on the road to have two vehicles like that, because I was taking up the whole road in a giant Buick. So. Wow. And so then then the rest of your friends that you tried to talk to about this were just like, huh? Are you kidding? Yeah, exactly. And I tell people about it. I tell people, the story, because
there are things in this world that we don't have a full explanation of. And a lot of people do have sightings. And, I even told my boss about it today. And she was kind of looking at me like I was crazy. But, I saw it with my own eyes. And that's all I can say is I'm a believer. So.
And so did you have other experiences after that?
No, nothing after that. But I feel lucky, honestly, to be able to have seen what I've seen. And, nothing came negatively after that with it, like during that, while we were going through it. And, I feel lucky. I feel like I'm one of the lucky ones, and I feel like I'm super lucky to have it that close to the vehicle.
Wow, and there was no heat. I mean, there was nothing that happened mechanically to the vehicle then.
No. And thinking about the size of it and what it was, the only thing that could go through my mind was there really couldn't have been anything inside of it unless it was a really small organism. But, it very easily could have been something like a drone or something, or some kind of probe or whatever they're using type thing. So.
And so when it came to the side of your car, how big would you say it was?
I would say probably right around the size of a volleyball or a basketball.
Wow. And so you were mentioning that you were going to go out and visit your buddy. You were on your way out there and that, he had been out there. And obviously that's, you mentioned the brine shrimp and that whole industry. That's a wild, wild tale of, people that are out there literally with guns, big guns, and somebody comes in and swoops up stuff. You are in trouble. But I mean, what did your friend who had been out there for a long time, had he ever seen or heard about anything?
No, he never did. They had like a couple trailers out there that they stayed in when they stayed out there over the weekends and when they stayed out there working. And I don't think they came out very much except for when they were working because, Utah in January, pretty cold. So, it's still, I would say, probably from the spot that I saw, whatever I want to call it that I saw, and where the camp was probably still a good 10-minute drive going that fast. So there was some distance between it.
Wow.
So.
Yes. And it's interesting to me because over the years, I mean, I have created relationships with different people that have been in specific parts of Utah and have seen things. And it's like it's cool to put together a piece of, the pieces of the puzzle. And another area that I have really looked into is the area around Kennecott Copper. And things, there are definitely just tons of things that take place in that area. And so I don't know, I just think it's fascinating. But and we just lost Travis. Of course, why would there ever not be some sort of experience? As you know, there've already been several tonight. That's the way I'm rolling. But it's just absolutely trippy. And so Travis, I'm sorry that you dropped off there, but I would love to get you back on the show when the internet isn't acting up and Skype isn't being naughty, and then just talk a little bit more about that. But right now, I want to just read a little bit about some things because, like I said, I've got this wonderful, wonderful archive, and I'm in the process now of creating a space that will be open to the public for serious researchers to come and do what they need to do. And I'm in the process of also reaching out to people who have specific research. They have, lifelong work, books, different things like that they can donate to this archive. It is going to be very, very special, and I'm looking forward to working with some people on this project. I've been up at the University of Utah a lot. They've got the special archives there that actually houses the holdings of Dr. Frank Salisbury, 80 boxes to be exact. He worked for NASA. He was a botanist and also wrote the first book on the Uinta Basin and sightings, a really important book, the Utah UFO Display. And so that's really, incredible. So Utah is a great place for not only really interesting sightings and also for learning about the subject. And I love it, love it, love it. I'm going to read to you an article, and I have this in my archive. And most people don't even know about this, but this is so cool. This is from the Sun Chronicle in Roy, Utah. The date is March 23rd, 1972. And there is a photo of the Salt Lake Temple, and guess what? There is a very strange object above the temple. Where to go with that one? I could go so many places, but anyway, I'll read you what it says. Under the photo, it says, this photo of an unidentified flying object was taken March 8th, 1972. It is one of a series of 7 taken as the object passed leisurely over Salt Lake City from northwest to southeast. This little article was by Roy Laurenson, and he was an active researcher in the area at the time. The article is entitled, UFOs Remain Mystery. The article says, with the successful launch of Pioneer 10 on its extended space odyssey towards the giant cloud-covered planet Jupiter, the long-standing UFO mystery here on our planet was at least temporarily forgotten. However, the enigmatic UFOs, apparently unimpressed by our efforts, have not forgotten the planet Earth. On March 5th, photographs were taken on 2 separate occasions of UFOs as they posed leisurely over Salt Lake City. Again on the 8th, one revisited the area and posed long enough to have its photo taken, drifting silently over the downtown area. These mysterious visitors have been with us since the beginning of our recorded history. The Condon Report notwithstanding, and it seems paradoxical that such sightings would be suppressed in our enlightened age. Even the faith of the Bible is based upon intervention by beings alien to this planet into the affairs of mankind. And so, that was Roy, Utah. And like I'm mentioning, and I've wanted to really dig into Roy Laurenson because I've been looking at his work. I mentioned that, he was from Utah and did some things that were really incredible. And now in my hand, I have a magazine called Beyond. And it was October 1968. And on the cover, it says, there's a dog. There was Roy's dog. Alien UFO destroys dog in Utah. And so this magazine is quite interesting, and you've got articles like, as I'm just finding this article, does the moon really affect human moods? Well, we probably can figure that one out. And then the article, which is super cool, and I will post that if I can get permission to do so. With copyright stuff, I'll figure that out. The article is entitled, Destroyed in Utah by Alien UFO. Owner feels effective radiation and film is fogged in camera after attempt to photograph UFO. And then it goes on to say, determined to solve UFO mystery by scientific methods, former U.S. Navy electronic expert wants public aid in nationwide crusade. I'm going to start reading you this article because it's just absolutely fascinating. And the picture of his beloved dog before and after being exposed to whatever this is truly heartbreaking. I'm an animal lover. Roy H. Laurenson of Salt Lake City, Utah, former U.S. Navy electronic expert, is determined to solve the UFO mystery by scientific methods. A skilled photographer has already taken startling pictures of a UFO in flight. Encouraged by his own success, he is preparing a booklet telling others how to photograph UFOs, and he has already developed an efficient, low-cost UFO detector. A dedicated UFO researcher, Laurenson says, he has decided to stop trying to go it alone and organized a nationwide UFO reporting network to aid him in his research. He points out that definitive patterns emerge from a lengthy analysis of reported sightings with dates, times, and circumstances. His observations are as follows. For years, we seem to have kept under observation by these UFOs, carefully checking our planet for signs of intelligent life, habitually, etc., from a distance. The pace was stepped up in the late 1800s when it was found Mars was sporting a couple of new satellites, and this was made known to the world in general. Checking back, this fact was known as early as 1726 to a few which seemed to indicate no connection. The more logical assumption would seem to be better communications and wider publicity. With the passing of time and the natural progress of our civilization, says Lorenzen, it became necessary to get better understanding of our environment. The implication, turning the page as you can clearly hear, was evident. To an advanced culture, our progress was reaching a point of some importance. Hence, instrument probes, Foo Fighters of World War II, for example, photographs, atmosphere samples, general mapping of our planet, centers of population, their nature and extent. Until this era, the inhabitants had been pretty much alone. Closer observations are being made now. Their modes of transportation, speed, capabilities, performance, characteristics, types of propulsion, and their maneuverability seem to be under close scrutiny on a worldwide basis. The general development of the populace from continent to continent came under a much heavier observation. Each phase of the observation seems to have progressed in a logical sequence. Contacts began to be reported in isolated areas of humanoid occupants having been seen inside the UFOs, obviously testing for a reaction. This same phase shows increased interest in our electronic defense systems, electrical power centers, and networks and communication systems of a very definite display of the means of rendering all of this useless. The flight patterns over the entire world would also seem to indicate a comprehensive mapping of these systems and the military centers. Also, it could have provided at the same time detailed maps of our entire planet from one end to the other, updating as necessary, taking into account our progress and development since the first rough surveys were made. Reports began to be made of UFO knots having landed in various parts of the world. Of course, it may be said that these reports were figments of human imagination and statements by publicity seekers. However, in view of the fact that the strange beings were reported to have taken samples of soil, water, animals, rocks, artifacts, vegetation, and air, and that we intend doing the same thing with the moon, it just kind of makes sense. Then we come to the matter of contact. We now can consider the final stage of that pattern. We are, however, aware of the presence, even though it is denied officially. We are also aware of a superior technical knowledge and apparent lack of hostility. Here they began to show themselves to large numbers of people, chasing cars, aircraft, cattle, and making a further effort to determine our hostility and to what extent. It is reasonable to assume if they do come from an advanced culture, they've been through all of this before. Going about the universe exploring and mapping the various galaxies would be just as natural as it was for us to explore the map of our continents. Once they determined we were not exactly hostile, they began a demonstration of superior technology by stopping cars from a distance, interfering with communications, blacking out large areas of our main power distribution systems, absconding with electrical weather equipment, etc. We all recall the various power failures across the nation and in other parts of the world during 1965, 66, and 67. In each case, UFOs are reported having been operated in the distressed areas during the time of the blackouts. Now, except for the rare instances where they obviously tried to provoke a reaction in what would seem to be a further effort to check additional retaliatory measures available to us, the major case having been at a military base in Latin America. The next logical supposition in view of these observations, together with our recent Apollo 8 accomplishment, would seem to indicate an increased flurry of UFO activity during the 1969 to 1970 period. This should take the form if the pattern holds of an increasing in sightings, reported landings, and contacts from various types all over the world, even from people that would know almost nothing about the world outside their own little village or hamlet. I don't have any figures for comparison now, but it would seem the flap has already started. It should last almost 2 years, this time if the past events can be relied upon as an indication. One other thought, it may be noteworthy to point out the major UFO flaps of the past coincide closely with the phases of Mars, and it seems reasonable to assume an outpost could have very well been established there sometime around 1726 our time, especially since NASA seemed to have fumbled the pictures of our much publicized flyby. Those published apparently have been little seen, views of the moon reversed. Mr. Lorenzen's pictures of what looks like a UFO in flight have an interesting and terrifying background. It was about 3 in the afternoon, he said, and I was finishing a series of outdoor photographs for an advertising company. The temperature was in the 30s, and the air was crisp and clear. It was one of those days when sound carried for miles. At the moment I seemed to be enveloped in a complete silence, the only sound being my own footsteps and the heavy panting of Bess, my English bulldog, who enjoys romping in the mountains and always insists on accompanying me when I take one of the outdoor assignments. Suddenly I heard a low, agitated growl. I swung around, and there Bess was, going into a crouch. I could almost hear the hair on her back bristling. Her ears went back and her teeth were bared. Seeing this almost completely out of character for her, I was on guard immediately, expecting the presence of a wild animal. I dropped my camera case and put my rifle to my shoulder, not knowing what to expect. I could see nothing. Absolutely nothing. Bess seemed frozen in her position. I scanned the cliffs and the rocks above for what must have been several minutes, expecting to see a mountain lion near. Then I spotted it, and literally gasped in amazement. Seemingly hanging in the sky in a gap between the cliffs were 3 dark cone-shaped objects drifting silently along. I don't know how long it was before I had the presence of mind enough to reach for my camera. I did it, however, just in time and got one exposure as the objects were going out of sight between the rocks. That was all. The pictures I am sending to Beyond show exactly what I saw for the 2 objects, which were already out of sight. The camera was pointing north-northeast in the mountains near Camas, Utah. I was using a 200mm lens with a 23A red filter on a 4x5 negative, which is in good condition. Of course, it could be suggested that the object in the photo was Venus or possibly Mars, except that we usually find them in the west or southwest in the evening. Again, it may be falling rock, except as every schoolboy knows, falling rocks do not move from left to right on a horizontal path. Lorenzen has formed a nationwide UFO groups, LITCO, Skywatchers, to investigate and report UFOs' activities of furthering systematic research. A skilled photographer himself, he has prepared a booklet which gives helpful tips on how to photograph UFOs. Also, he has available a schematic and parts list for construction of an inexpensive UFO detector. This is available to members of LITCO Skywatchers. Readers who are also interested in helping him can write to him. A glance through the instructions of the photographs then seem most comprehensive and practical we've seen. The writer not only suggests cameras are suitable for the special purpose, but also gives information on films, the objects cited, and there is information on filters, exposures, and light meters. The author also adds a warning to those who might be over-ambitious in your quest for UFOs. He says there are several things it would well to not do in advance. For example, do not, and we repeat, do not go near one if you see it land or find one on the ground. Keep your head, take your time, and get good photos from all sides. Keep your distance. Radiation may ruin the films. It has happened. Mark the spot well where you were standing, where you first saw it. Orient the flight path with any landmarks such as trees, barns, bridges, flagpoles, signs, or anything you can use to relate the exact path it traveled. As a further aid, hold a coin or some other small object at arm's length and compare the size of that with a UFO. Get an accurate count of time of how long it took to move from one landmark to another in relation to where you were standing. While it's still fresh in your mind, draw a map the best you can to remember everything. Show where you were standing for various distances from one point to another. Get witnesses whenever possible. You may tell them that you are a reporter from Blitko and their names will not be used without consent. If they want more information, encourage them to get membership. Do not shoot at UFOs or the occupants. Do not act hostile in any way, even if they appear to be. Simply keep your distance. Remember, their technology is far superior than ours. Wave or shout or blink your car lights if it seems to be appropriate, and be careful. Record any reactions you may get, but keep away. Should one hover over your car and car happens to become stalled, don't panic. It's happened before. Simply stay away or stay in the car. It will leave soon. If you happen to get caught out in the open and one seems to be attacking you, lie down flat until you're able to take cover. Do not run. As soon as you are able to, take whatever cover you can find. Trees, ditches, buildings, bridges, cars, etc. Stay put until it leaves. Should you observe any occupants, try to estimate their size as compared to yourself. Make careful notes of their clothing, style, color, shape, buttons or not, zippers, etc. Were they wearing some sort of hats? And if not, what did they look like? Were they wearing gloves, shape, color of shoes, and how they were fastened? General features of the body and face, if you were close enough to see such details. How many fingers on the hand, if you can tell. But do not approach just to get the information. Here, a good 200 millimeter lens will do a very nice job for you, and it is by far the better part of valor in this case. In addition to any photographs, note carefully how long it remained, either in flight or on the ground, as in the case may be, as well as any other information you may think will be of value. Make a report as complete as possible, as soon as possible, and get it in the mail to keep us informed. But you can never tell such information how much importance this will take in the future. Do get your report into the mail. So I want to just forward, because we're getting ready to the end of the show, and this article is quite lengthy and very, very passionate. As you can see, it gives some great details for you as somebody who is out there exploring. And I know we've got many people in chat right now and listening to the show that like to get out there and do field investigations. And I will just read a little bit more of what he says. Thus far, our discussion has been with regards to what to do when you see a UFO, and we have made no mention of the UFO detector or how to use it. We were deliberately saving this until we could get it into proper perspective. Once you have it all completed, all you need to do is set it up with a needle resting freely between contacts you built with a compass and turn it on. It will draw no current until it's activated by a magnetic disturbance of some sort. So the batteries will last a very long time. You may leave it out to operate in your home or apartment as long as you are there. Trains, trucks, cars, or aircraft will have no effect on it. Take it on picnics, hunting trips, fishing trips, and the like. Its purpose is to alert you to magnetic disturbances emanating from UFO activity. So keep your camera ready at all times. Even it is put away, filter in place, and set it to take pictures. We also carry, whenever we go out, that in our car for any reason. You will find that there are times you get an alert from the detector only to find the UFOs are much too far away to get meaningful results. And then he says sometimes, some time ago, while he was rock hunting specimens in the near mountains near Dugway Proving Grounds, he says, Spike, my prize male bulldog, discovered a UFO in a gully, some distance from where I had stopped to rest. He ran to investigate, refusing to answer my call, keeping my distance. I exposed about a dozen 4x5 film plates and still had a few left unexposed. on my camera. As the dog approached it, the UFO took flight, directly passing over my head from the southwest, and for a moment the sound was quite like that of an electrical generating plant, accompanied by a swishing sound of rushing air. Then silence. As it passed overhead, the bottom seemed to be almost perfectly flat, and the area around the circumference filled with oblong holes. The center portion was spinning while the outside remained stationary. I estimated the size to be about 40 to 50 feet across. That evening I got into the darkroom, even though I was feeling rather strange, like I may be catching the flu or something. Little did I realize I would feel even worse, but for a different reason. When the lights could be turned on after the negatives had been developed, all the films have been fogged, and as though that having been exposed to certain type of radiation, and were of absolutely no value whatsoever. Even those left unexposed in the camera bag were no good. The rest of the film in the original box in the darkroom was still perfectly good and subsequently used for other purposes. During the next few days, I began to become very restless. I was unable to keep food down and found it very difficult to concentrate. I noticed, too, the brown age spots on my arms and hands began to disappear. The dog was having problems too. Within a few days, he looked like what you see here in the picture. Poor Spike. Within a week, he was dead. And so I wish, and I will try to see if there is a digital copy of that article available online. Again, this is something I ordered offline many years ago because of its relation to UFOs in Utah, and it's, as I say, it's heartbreaking to see the pictures. I don't know what he and his dog were exposed to, but obviously they both became sick, and unfortunately his dog passed away. I know people that have also been around Dugway, and they're trying to get photographs of different things, allegedly UFOs, and they're probably at the end of the day being exposed to radiation and things. So I definitely, knowing what I know now, would not tell you guys to rush right out to the areas bordering Dugway for multiple reasons. Not only is it, just not the wisest thing for security purposes, but also because of health effects. Interestingly enough, in areas like Dugway and the neighboring communities, unfortunately, because of things that people are exposed to, the life expectancy is 10 years less than what we would see in other areas in Utah. So that is quite something, but there's so much going on here. And so I was really fortunate to have Peter come on the show earlier and tell you some interesting things that have to do with a larger picture at the end of the day. And I think that's important to know that, to know what's taking place politically with different people that are looking for technologies, people that are, Peter said it perfectly. So listen to that, and I apologize for Travis cutting out. But that was a very, very cool story, and I look forward to having him on again. He's told me that story for years. His story has never changed, and I remember the first time I heard it, it really kind of left this big imprint on me because he was just in shock, and that's something that never, I think, has left him in that regard. Utah, like every other place on the planet, has a long history of unexplained things. So I encourage each and every one of you to get out there in your community and sit in a bar or a local truck stop and gather information from people, hear their stories, go to the library, find historical information, learn about different military installations that were in the area and different Native American reservations. Learn about the political and religious history, but make sure you're archiving and preserving that, because some of these things will never ever get to see the light of the day, and they'll be forgotten unless each of us does this where we live. And I know that Mario Mario, you've got bats on chat. Sweet baby Joseph, you made my whole life complete. That's an inside joke with people that know Mario, who was just an absolute love to me. But yeah, Mario does a lot of work in his community, and he gathers witness testimony and helps preserve that history. So all of you, I encourage you to do it. It's fun. You meet some colorful people, and you learn a lot. At the end of the day, will I figure out what this is? I probably won't. But you know what? I'm going to have a good time trying to figure it out. I hope all of you do too. I want to thank all of you for your love and support. Please go to UFO Classified to become a Patreon. Every little bit that you donate helps me, A, keep the show on the air, and B, further the research and helping preserve history. I mentioned in the show that I'm going to be just really cranking out stuff with the archive. And if any of you out there have an archive, or you know of anybody who is going to toss their research into the trash or send their research outside the United States or different things, please, please, please reach out to me, because I will help you preserve that history, and I will make sure that I am telling a story of the person whose work I have. I will keep their memory alive and help all of us learn from that, because this is so cool. It is just fascinating. I love you guys. Thanks for always rolling with my really special audio skills. But I guess that just kind of makes the show, exciting. So I will catch you guys next week, and it is going to be a wonderful show. I will be interviewing Tim Schwartz, and we will be talking about the life and legend Tim Beckley, who passed away a bit ago. Tim Schwartz was his very dear friend, and he spoke with him every day for 30 years. And Tim Beckley, I can tell you, hadn't talked about a life. We will remember that next Friday. So all of you guys be safe. Love you guys, and I will catch you next Friday.
So my skeptical mind, and that's just who I am. My skeptical mind goes to, well, yeah, of course, you've got this guy over here that's logical and reasonable, and you got this guy over here that's wearing a tinfoil hat. Of course, the tinfoil hat guy's gonna see a lot of stuff, right? He's like imagining it, or he's watched one too many sci-fi movies.
But it's used to help us frame hypotheses for UFO propulsion, power, stealth, weaponry.
Everything that we experience is very positive.
Sometimes the field of ufology has a short memory span.
We didn't know anything about the $22 million back then. We just kind of thought, well, this is, and I think that was the reason why they were looking for military-type people, because in the military, you work with whatever you got, no matter what the situation is, and you just kind of adapt and overcome.
What are you going to do with all this? You can't even take care of your own files and get them put into the current system, but yet you want to go collect other people's things. So what are you going to do with it? Who are you giving all this to?
It just really struck me about how the common thread seemed to be deception, but deception of a human nature. So that's what I started thinking, who would these folks be? I mean, then I started thinking about the intelligence agencies, what role they could play, and what would be their motivations for getting involved in ufology.
I'm not saying that because the gimbal is not a rotating flying saucer, that means that all the UFOs are false. Not at all. All I'm doing is I'm looking at this one case, these individual cases, and seeing if there's an explanation for those. So try to, if I could ask people out there listening, don't think that I'm trying to attack your entire beliefs about these things.
Nice to be in orbit.